Right. Hello, everybody.
Hey guys.
Right. So we've been away for a little bit, but we are back with a new review. So, Jake, do you want to start us off with our intro?
Sure, I'm Jake,
And I'm Cam.
and we've got issues. Yeah, today's couple of issues are, or the collected piece that Cam has.
Yep, we are looking at The Hobbit, of course, by none other than J.R.R. Tolkien, but we are looking at the illustrated comic version, which is illustrated by David Wenzel and adapted by Charles Dixon and Sean Deming. So, why don't we make a start by talking about this particular project because it's one that I've wanted to talk about for some time, and it just so happened that you also had the series, and again, like usual, we sometimes completely forget that we share a lot in common in terms of our library. Um, so David Wenzel. Now, I mistakenly thought that he had worked on the Lord of the Rings movies from a conceptual design standpoint, but to my understanding, he didn't actually, because the work that he does in this book is really, perhaps in my opinion, and Jake, you can chime in here. In my opinion, this is probably the most accurate depiction of Middle Earth, put to paper in terms of an illustrated guide to Middle Earth. Um, Now, I really did want to start there because the artwork in this, the story, if you've not read The Hobbit, um, you could even get away with reading this particular book because the story is exactly the same. It's a very very close adaptation. But what I wanted to stress here is that it's unique in the fact that the illustrations in this, the artwork, really adds another dimension to the story that you wouldn't necessarily have from the book, and definitely not from the newer Peter Jackson films, the Hobbit trilogy, let's say. Anyway, Jake, why don't you sort of start off by telling us about your introduction to this particular comic series?
Oh yeah, sure. I have. I'm a big J.R.R. Tolkien fan. I've read his work ever since pretty much I was a young boy. Essentially having read like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings at a pretty early age. And having seen or heard, actually, we had the original soundtracks to both The Hobbit and The Return of the King by Rankin Bass. Like those are the cartoon adaptations that kind of bookended the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings cartoon adaptation. So when I saw these books come out originally, like back in 1989, I just gobbled them up at my local comic store. Um, Essentially, I had never uh, seen anything like this, like The Hobbit as adapted into comic book form, and I was really glad I picked them up back then. Like nothing since then has come out to adapt, I think, Tolkien's work into such a faithful form. So
Yeah,
it was great to kind of share that with you and to share some ideas with you as far as like this when I read it, it feels to me what The Hobbit is actually a children's book. It predates the Lord of the Rings by a couple of years, really. And thematically, The
mm,
Hobbit is very much just a tale that you read to your kids at bedtime and that they will just totally get engrossed with. Of course, this was back um in the early 20th century, so there are some mature thematic elements that you could probably read to your kids back then and get away with. There's war,
yeah,
there's violence, bloodshed, and stuff like that. But still, much of it is colored by the fact that, hey, you've got not only little people called hobbits running around. You've got dwarves, you've got wizards, you've got wild wolves called dwarves, you've got goblins, you've got like giants on the mountain, you've got people that change into bears, you've got
Yeah,
elves, you've got
yeah, it's all
basically an
there.
adventure story that
Mm,
has a beginning, a middle, and an end, all told masterfully. Um,
yeah.
and these issues are amazing adaptations of this tale.
Mm. And you know, I mean that what struck me as I was reading through this is what a cozy journey this is. I mean, The Hobbit in itself, as you said, is a more innocent fantasy romp compared to its big brother, which is its sequel, The Lord of the Rings. But this tale told in the way that it is as a comic um, really did make me feel very much nostalgic for the animated movies actually that I've only seen the first the Lord of the Rings, the first installment, which was rotoscoped. Who was the director? Do you remember, Jake? Because
Yeah, that's
I
Ralph Bakshi.
yeah, right. So I mean, it was a very strange film in a lot of respects, mainly down to the aesthetics because of the rotoscoping. But I have a lot of nostalgia for it when I saw it as a kid, and but this is just such a cozy adaptation, and it all comes down to, in my opinion, to the art, which is just sublime. It's so evocative of the kind of world building that Tolkien is so famous for, so renowned for, and to be honest, and I'd like to know what your opinion on this is, but the writing, the characterization is also really well done. I thought Bilbo, for example, if we were to compare it with the later adaptation, the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies, I think I think Bilbo and all of the other characters are much better fleshed out than they are in those films. I mean, what do you think in terms of the writing?
Um, in my opinion, of course, we're bound to compare this to the three-part Hobbit trilogy that
Yeah.
came out not too long ago in the 21st century,
Hmm.
and this I think to me is a more faithful adaptation of the source material, mainly because the original Hobbit book is a children's book, and you kind of if I read the Hobbit like back in the 80s. So when I kind of think of it, I think of it in these types of colors and this kind of tone and this kind of theme.
Mm, yeah.
Um, so when, of course, The Lord of the Rings came out before The Hobbit as far as movies go for live action, and The Hobbit didn't have much of a choice but to borrow from the thematic elements of The Lord of the Rings, which would kind of, I think, in my opinion, put the world building and character design. You didn't have much of a choice but to say like, hey, we have to adapt that into
Mm,
The Hobbit, which to me would naturally lend itself to a much more, I wouldn't say darker or grimmer, but they were, yeah, it had to go into a more built up world than what I would originally imagine The Hobbit as being.
yeah. And what I felt as well is that those three movies were very much bloated affairs, in my opinion, because the Hobbit is a very neat, self-contained story, and you can and again, it's wonderfully told in this particular book, but the films, because of the Lord of the Rings and the popularity of those three films, for whatever reason, well, we know the reason, money, but the the studio decided that they wanted to absolutely expand what could have been essentially one 3 hour movie into into a 9 hour marathon, which the Hobbit never was never supposed to be. So I think this adaptation far more sort of aptly bridges bridges the book and the movies into this really really perfect package, in my opinion, in terms of an alternative take on the story. And a lot of that is down to the pacing of the story, the writing, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, the art, which is just so magical. It really, I mean, David Wenzel really, really did an amazing job here in terms of the just the panel work, the character designs. It's all, and it's all evocative of the book. And in fact, we had this conversation earlier on, before we recorded. But didn't we both say, like, wouldn't imagine what he could have done with the Lord of the Rings, adapting the Lord of the Rings as a comic book series. To me, that's going to be one of my most wanted projects that will probably never happen, but
Who
um,
knows? Who knows?
who
I
knows?
I
But
think they're both still alive. I think David Wenzel and Chuck
yeah,
Dixon.
I actually wikied whether David Wenzel was still working or even alive, and yeah, he is. So um, it's really it's really a shame that we, at least so far, we didn't see a Lord of the Rings adaptation, because if he can do it with, as I said, with the help of Charles Dixon and Sean Deming, who were responsible for adapting the story, if they can perform the same kind of magic as they did on this book, I'm there. I'm there day one, because this was
Yeah,
some of the best fantasy storytelling I have ever read. And I was telling you, and I'm gonna tell the audience again, if this was The Hobbit, the movie, if this is how the movie played out in exactly the same way as this book, that would have been a 5 out of 5 movie for me. Instead
yeah,
of the
because
mess, in my opinion, instead of the
yeah,
mess that we actually got of three movies to tell a very very simple story, which was just way over bloated. But this is just fantasy perfection. What do you reckon?
yeah. I think basically that um they would have done it. There's probably licensing issues with trying to do that nowadays with the
You
Lord of
mean
the
the Lord
Rings
of the
being
Rings?
yeah, with the Lord of the Rings being such a hot property or IP.
Yeah.
This was done like this is 1989, and this was years after they had done those adaptations by Bakshi and the Rankin Bass twins, which were done in I think the late 70s. And
Yeah, they
so
were.
this was already 19 years, more than 19 years after that. So interest in it had cooled, although of course everybody the Hobbit can be assigned as reading in your schools, right? So it'll never go away as
Mm,
a piece of popular fiction. However, in 1989, this was like the biggest thing that could ever happen to it because you're
mm,
just like, wait, okay, let's put this out in this form. Um,
yeah,
and there were popular illustrators that would do adaptations of Tolkien's work and such, but um this one when it just pops out there out of the blue,
yeah.
um you can't help but just be entranced by it. And by the way, like David Wenzel essentially supposedly made it a project of his senior year to do the character designs in senior year of university to do the character designs of the Hobbit. He was already a big
Oh,
Tolkien
really?
fan before.
Mm. Oh,
So
nice.
I would love to get the collected edition of this that has 32 pages of additional art, which I've not seen. I've only got the original editions when they came out in
Mm.
1989. Um,
Uh, I didn't know there was a additional material in the new. Is that the newer collected edition? Because this is one I got from a charity store.
which one is
It's
that one? Is
it's
that
an
the Bantam edition?
this is the Eclipse version,
Okay, so the
which
Eclipse version does it is it published by Bantam Books or still published by Eclipse? The original publisher is
mm,
Eclipse.
the yeah the it's Grafton Books.
Okay.
Yeah, which
Not
is
sure
part
what
of
the other
Harper
editions
Collins.
are, but apparently there was another edition out there with many pages of additional art. I've never seen it. I'd love to see it.
I would hunt that down, definitely. Um, but yeah, I mean, in terms of the story, as someone, I think you're certainly you've read the book, and you're um, far more aware of perhaps any differences between the book and the comic series than I am. So,
Sure.
are there any major changes in terms of the
Well,
story
of
or?
course, a lot of this is still prose heavy, and
Mhm.
that's something that also I have to give a shout out to Bill Pearson, the hand the person who hand lettered this three
Yeah,
issue epic. This is all hand
yeah,
lettered, and there's a lot of text because there's a lot of
yeah,
exposition by Tolkien, and
yeah,
the original Hobbit is uh for a children's book. It's a very lengthy book. It's a chapter book
yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
Um, with a few illustrations by the author if you get that edition.
yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Um, sorry, yeah, yeah. Sorry, go on.
uh, so the pacing, I think, follows accurately to the actual book itself. It follows very very accurately. It doesn't omit anything like some of the movies does, and it
Or
doesn't omit
add
certain
tons of,
characters. Yeah,
or in the movie, in the case of the
or in the
movies, just
case of the
add
Hobbit,
tons of
it
stuff.
adds tons of stuff. I'm
Yeah.
thinking the Lord of the Rings, where it kind of takes some stuff out.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, you can't fault the pacing of these three books, and they kind of go one chapters 1, 2, and 3 in kind of perfect pacing, because it kind of leaves you um as the adventure goes, it's like a serial. It leaves you at the
yeah.
end of book one. You're just like, okay, well, so he just met Gollum, or is Gollum about to eat this guy? If you've never
Mm,
read it.
yeah,
um
yeah.
so I think you couldn't have done any better as far as
Mm,
what you could have done for this particular adaptation. That's beautifully drawn and
yeah.
painted by
I
Wenzel,
agree.
and Dixon
Yeah,
is really great at kind of pacing the dialogue and
yeah.
making sure that the characters stay true to what Tolkien
Mm.
intended them to be.
And just to add to that, I really want to. What I was trying to say earlier was Bill Pearson. I 100% agree. His lettering in some of these panels is just so intricate. That's an art in of itself.
Oh
And it
yeah.
really does feel very faithful to the if you like the feel of the story. It almost helps you transport yourself into this world, into Middle Earth. um and it's just so it's got so much character. I mean, looking at Smog here, I mean, this is what I imagined Smog to look like. Not so much the movie adaptation, but like
Mm.
this. Um, and even the dialogue. I mean, it is very dialogue heavy, and there's a lot of sort of the prose is sometimes um, substantially more than you'd probably get from your average comic. But I feel that the way it's written, the way Dixon adapted a lot of the text, is in such a way that the story doesn't get bogged down, does it? It just flows really well, and it's a very easy read. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, it's great. Like, Dixon did a lot of work for both Marvel and DC. He's
Yeah,
known for stuff like The Punisher, and some of his work with Batman and Nightwing.
he's
Um,
done Moon Knight as well, I think.
and he's done Moon Knight as well. Yeah, he's actually uh, an accomplished comic book writer.
Hmm.
And I would never think that that a comic book writer, like a superhero comic book writer, would adapt something like this, but he does it quite flawlessly. It's great. Like, the pacing is
Yeah.
great, and Um, yeah, there's no fault in the adaptation of the script and the
No.
art. Like it really, really goes well together.
I mean, I'd go as far as to say, and I'm not the biggest fan of hyperbole, but this is probably the most perfect adaptation of a book of a prose novel, a literary classic to comic book format. I mean, I can't think of a better example of it done as well as this. Um, and by the end of it, because the pacing is so perfect, the art is so evocative, the dialogue so memorable. By the end of it, and I'm actually gonna call you out, Jake, because you said when you reach the end, you're gonna want to go all the way back to the start and read it again. And you know what? You're absolutely right. This is a book. You know, like I've always said to people who ask me, like Cam, you've got hundreds of books, hundreds of comic books. How do you decide what stays and what goes? And I have a really simple answer to that. What stays is what I'm going to pick up and read more than once. What goes are those that are a one and done, didn't exactly want to read it a second time. Those are the ones that go on eBay or get handed over to somebody else. But this, The Hobbit, this one is going to be taken off my shelf at least, and I'm not even kidding, at least once a year because it is that good.
Yeah, and you know what? I've been thinking about reading this to my kids. To get them
Oh, it's
interested in
perfect,
Japanese
isn't it?
stories because my kids are young and they're still very generally impressionable. They love good artwork, and good stories. And at story time, I think I'll probably pick up book one of the series and read it to my kids. Probably the highest acclaim I can give to a comic book is something that
Yeah.
I genuinely want to read to my kids. Something that I
Mm,
know is going to be something that grips them and makes them think,
yeah.
but kind of makes them go into this fantasy world. You're this is like reading the book. This is what you picture when you read the book. You're just like, wow, this is literally the book in in a
Yeah.
in a graphic form.
Yeah. I mean, I really couldn't put it clearer than that. This is, you know what it is. If anyone wants a really simple description of this book, this is what the Hobbit movie as a single film should have been. This is what
Yeah.
it is right here.
Yeah,
You
it
know?
I mean, you can say a lot of what this is. This is not a cash grab like what the
No.
movie seems to have been. I
Yeah.
wanted to really like the movie. I really did because
Same here.
I
Same
had
here.
I had I had read this. I had seen and the past cartoon adaptations. I had listened to the Rankin Bass LPs, the audio LPs, because at that point um we didn't have the films to always watch over and over. We just had like a record player that had those LPs. And when I was reading those books, when I was 7 or 8, those had a big influence on me. And
Hmm.
I think, as a matter of fact, when I read this, I'm sure even those adaptations, especially the Rankin and Bass, probably influenced this as well. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually gone into the background of those films or those productions, but whatever they did here, it just amounts to absolute magic. As somebody who grew up not just reading Tolkien, but not so, I was never really into Tolkien as a child, but I was very much into fantasy in general. Sort of the David Eddings and David Gemmell, and just heroic fantasy in general, Dungeons and Dragons,
Hmm.
and this, this is pretty much what I was always hoping for as a lover of this, as somebody who's in love with this format, who's lives and breathes comic books. I always wanted a fantasy. It could have been an original fantasy story, or high fantasy tale, or an adaptation of some of my favorite novels. but something that could match just the perfection that this has in terms of the pacing, the storytelling, the characterization, the artwork. It all just comes together, and that's the highest praise I can give it, because this to me is not only one of the best reads I've had in 2024, which is saying something because we we read a lot in a year. But it's also probably one of the best adaptations from any kind of media of a book to alternative format, and in this case, sequential artwork as a comic book. This is the highest caliber when it comes to how well it can be done, and it really hurts that David Wenzel didn't, either he probably didn't have the opportunity to, or for whatever reason it just didn't happen or hasn't happened yet. But I really wish he would have a chance to adapt the Lord of the Rings, because I was telling you, man, like if he could pull off the same level of perfection as the Hobbit, I mean, geez, I'm I'm on board for that. That's just unreal.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I'm wishing for that dream project when they can collaborate, and hopefully, this stuff isn't um it makes me wish for that more innocent time back then, before
Yeah.
all of these streaming services, before all the media blitz, when you could just go into something like a comic book store and just find a great piece of work.
Mm.
A great piece of work that's, for in this case, original, because it was, even though it's an adapted piece, it's original because it hadn't been done before.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I agree 100%. And I guess to close out my thoughts on this, um, I read somewhere in a news article, I think it was a New York Times, that the Hobbit is considered cozy fantasy. Some people call it cozy fantasy, in that it, as you said earlier on in this review, that it has a very clear start and then a middle, and then it kind of ties everything up at the end. And it's not about sort of world changing events, it's more about more, I suppose, sort of smaller tales, smaller sort of circumstances and consequences, compared to something like Lord of the Rings, which could change all the destinies of people on, well, across the world, basically, Middle Earth. So
Hmm.
taking that phrase, or that caption, that description, cozy fantasy, um, that's how I would sum up The Hobbit in the David Wenzel Hobbit adaptation in 2 words: cozy fantasy. And it is easily my favorite read thus far this year. So, any closing thoughts from you, Jake?
Um, I'm gonna get something that will kind of give a little bit of a contrast. So I had shown you this earlier, Cam. Um, but here is The Hobbit as adapted in a book by, this is the original J.R.R. Tolkien book, but the artwork is by Alan Lee, and Alan Lee worked on the film, right?
There you go. Yeah, I always get mixed up with the two. Yeah, Alan Lee was the one who
Alan Lee was
worked on the
one of the
concept
main,
work.
yeah, the principal
Mm.
concept artists. Um,
Hmm.
and this one is signed to me because I got this signed by him many years ago when I worked at Books of Wonder in New York, and he was signing there. But just to kind of give you,
Wow.
this is the book, and just the way that, and this is like all of the prose, and this is
Yeah.
his take of what it was. Very much close
it,
to
well, I mean, keep that open, keep that page open, because I want to show sort of a contrast in sort of the styling
you could
of
go right to the very first issue of that book, which has the same scene on it, and you could contrast that scene with this one, them falling
let's
through the
have a
door.
look. Oh yeah, okay, hold on.
I think it's in the very first pages, maybe.
Oh, here we are. Yeah.
And here you can
Yeah.
already see, because this was the the illustrator who worked on the films, you could see that there is a marked difference, of course, in
Mm,
styles. Um,
yeah.
uh, and it's cool. It's cool to have that. It's
It
really cool to
it's
have
a
that.
yeah, it's a cool contrast, but I have to say, and I don't know if you agree with me on this, but I think Wenzel's style is probably for me more appropriate for the Hobbit than Lee's sort of darker, maybe more um grounded artwork. This like Wenzel's art is very well, not dreamlike, but very nostalgic, very um hmm, just it's very evocative of magic. It's very magical, whereas the images from Lee seem to have a more sort of just a darker sort of a darker rendition of the story. I mean, do you
Yeah,
think you
yeah.
agree
And
with
in a
that?
way, I think um, I can't really comment too much on the history of Alan Lee's illustrations for J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah.
I think those are essentially, I think Peter Jackson took a lot of his ideas from those original illustrations before he made the movies. So
Mm,
that's why he actually asked them to work on the movies, because he was like, he couldn't
hmm.
picture the movies as anything other than the illustrations that he saw from the
Yeah.
works that those illustrators had for Tolkien.
Mm,
So not to say that I would have to say that Wenzel's art is to me a little bit more, and this is kind of strange to say, but it still just reminds me more of the Rankin Bass adaptations in its whimsy and its innocence. Um,
mm. That's a nice way of looking at it. Yeah, it's very innocent. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and it really, I mean, for me, it really takes you on a journey. I felt just it's just so well realized and so well researched, and um, yeah, as I mean, as I said, it's one that I'm going to pick up at least once a year. So that's my take on The Hobbit. Any closing comments from you, Jake, before
no,
we
no, this was
clock
great.
off?
This was great to feature on the show. I hope that more people pick it up.
Yeah,
Just to see how great it is. And also, if you do pick it up and like the book, make sure to also like our podcast and subscribe. The more people that kind of see us and recommend us to our friends, the more we can grow this channel.
yeah, definitely. If you enjoy the show, definitely please do support us and comment below as well. We'd love to read anyone's opinions on these books and The Hobbit. You know, maybe perhaps you read The Hobbit as a child, or even as an adult, and then and then you went and checked out this adaptation. Let us know. Do you prefer it? Do you prefer one over the other? But yeah, let us know in the comments. So that's about it from us. Thanks for watching, sticking with us for this review, and we'll be back soon with another. So until then, take care, everybody.
All right, guys. Thank you. Bye.